Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Ricconi. Jesus reminds us to watch for the signs of his return. Today we will explore further what we are seeing in our times that line up with what signs he said would indicate the potential of the end and his return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, Kathy. It's Friday. It's End Times Friday.
Good morning. Happy Friday.
Yeah, we're getting, by the way, lots of followers who are always anticipating going further into the next piece of this because it's the feedback that I've gotten is that it's been very helpful to just put a biblical perspective to it.
Yes, absolutely.
Because there's a lot of noise and comments and predictions and what everything means. And again, the way we've approached it is what Jesus said, watch the signs. And we characterize those properly as birth pangs. And as birth pangs, they start, and as they get closer, they get more intense and more frequent.
Right.
So we can say, and Jesus, the reason he said it, and this is why it's so critical, and he said the same thing to when he started the book of Revelation. Pay attention, listen and understand what I'm saying, and be obedient to what I'm saying. So it's really important for us to consider this. But he said, watch the signs, so that it would stimulate us to ask him, what would you have us do? What would you have us understand? How do you want us to prepare for this? And that's why, as we consider the signs, we could definitely say, well, there's a lot of signs. And it's very, very possible that we could be. And again, the reason, again, is to ask God, what would you tell us? What would you have us understand? And what do you want us to prepare for? Because at the same time, every generation has thought, well, there's signs, and maybe this is it. And so it's kind of a both and. It's, by the way, for sure, there's going to be a real moment where this is it.
Right.
And it's happening. And so, Father, help us understand it. And are we to be prepared? And what do you want to say to us about it? And that's why I wanted every generation not to presume, well, okay, well, then I can just stop living and I'll just prepare for the end. It seems to me that this is it. You could go back to World War II with Hitler. It's like, well, there it is. There's the beast and there's the Antichrist, and that's everything.
And one of our go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say one of our listeners actually made a comment on one of them on one of the recent videos, and I thought it was so good, and it goes with what you're talking about in the prepare. There is the physical prepare. Is there something you want us to be doing as we watch the signs that we need to know as we're walking forward into these things? But then there's a heart preparation that he invites us into as well. And it is very easy. And this is what the listener brought up, was it's really easy for people, I think the church, especially these days with all of the chaos going around and divisions and everything else, to focus on the signs and, okay, what would I physically do to prepare, and ignore the heart preparation. But the truth is that the bridegroom wants to ready his bride. Right. And so there is both and in that. There's specific instruction that could be physical preparation, but there is heart preparation and a call to repentance. Absolutely. And to allowing him to bring down the idols that is absolutely essential in all of this. And we cannot neglect it just because the other is easier, honestly.
Yeah. So what we will share is, well, we know that the truth of the word, and we're going to go to that. And then, is there anything new as we try to understand the signs
Mm-hmm.
that help us understand it as it perhaps is getting closer. And again, the one big thing to me is that Jesus said, when you see Israel return as a nation,
Mm-hmm.
that generation is going to see the end. Well, Israel has returned as a nation. And so that to me is one that we know it had to happen
Mm-hmm.
for the end to come. And unless it happened, the end wasn't here yet.
Right.
Well, it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And we do know that the tribulation, which we'll get into some of the detail as we process this, and actually we're going to talk about this today, is called the beast,
Mm-hmm.
and the beginning of the tribulation. And we do know that that's one world government
Right.
and one new economic system. Well, we've seen with again, my question always was, well, how is that going to work?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're all individual nations, and we're not going to easily give up our sovereignty. So, and that's why I always thinking, well, it can't be soon,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know how that's going to work. Well, COVID comes, and it kind of worked.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, the world willingly surrendered to a new authority.
Right.
It's got to act this way, and you got to quarantine. You got to wear a mask, and then now you got to get vaccinated, as they're trying to push that. And that's one of the things that is happening right now, is that there's mandates, and by the way, this is worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
In order to function, we need you and want you to be vaccinated.
Right.
Well, there's a lot of people because again, this isn't the mark of the beast per se. We have to go to God, and there's a lot of people that God's saying, no, I don't want you to take the vaccine.
Right.
But we're seeing the authority pushing it.
Right.
So one thing that I am watching for, by the way, a sign is, particularly in America, is what does the courts do with this mandate?
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, and it's kind of interesting. One is that it, because I've been in medical business my whole life, it violates HIPAA.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're asking companies to do violates HIPAA. And that is,
Interesting.
HIPAA was set up by the government, interesting enough, by the FDA,
Mm-hmm.
that all health information is private.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't share that with anybody. And I don't know if you've done this, but when I go to the doctor, even let's say for a physical,
Oh, yeah.
they have a form.
And you even have to sign off, if I can put Dan has permission to know what my medical things
That's
are
right.
or not.
You're
And
you're even giving them permission.
Mm-hmm.
HIPAA is that precise that in order for the doctor to actually process your information, you are the controller of that, and you say, I give you permission to actually look at and process this detail of my critical stuff, and they set it up purposely. Now, it's a little bit funny per se, because you're going to the doctor because you want him to do something, but they made it so rigid, and they put HIPAA in the control of the person.
Right.
And by the way, anybody that deals with that information, like we did a medical transportation business, and we transported data, information, forms. It always had to be sealed. And none of our drivers and our protocol, we could never open that up.
Right.
Or leave it open, because it would be a violation of HIPAA. And we weren't even going to do anything with it, but if we read it, that was a violation of HIPAA, because you, the patient, didn't give me permission to do that. Okay, well, so what they're asking companies to do is to ask your employees to verify they have or not taken the vaccine, and then you got to report that. You, company, got to report that to the government. And it doesn't go down to the individual who says, I don't need to tell you that information.
Right.
You don't have a right to that information. It's my private information. So it violates HIPAA. So it's going to be interesting to see, where that plays out. And so what's going to happen, what it is happening is it's in the courts.
Mm-hmm.
So the sign that I'm watching for is what happens in the courts around that issue of mandating something that I have now lost my freedom of a choice that I would like to make. And by the way, there's a lot of evidence, scientific evidence, that immunity, you might, first of all, have a natural immunity.
Right.
Secondly, you might have already had COVID.
Right.
And your antibodies are actually superior to the vaccine.
Right. So forcing that person to get the vaccine is completely illogical and doesn't go with science.
And then third, which we've all understood, people that have the vaccine still get COVID.
Right.
So mandating that is around personal freedom and the choice that I would still like to function in society. And by the way, and one of the things that I do suspect, which would be legitimate, and by the way, there are certain ministries and certain organizations that are already doing this. They say, well, either take the vaccine, or if you're going to be in a public place, like come to work, every week you got to get tested to say you don't have it. If you have it, stay home. If you don't have it, great, you can come, but you got to prove it. That would be a legitimate opportunity. You have a choice to make. You can choose this or this. It's your choice. But to say you have to do this only, is government control. So what I'm watching for, I'll get to the punchline here pretty quick, is if the courts support the mandate. Yes, we consider it constitutional. Yes, they can say that they want to. They can fire you if you don't take the thing. They can prevent you from entering a social environment, either the mandate or nothing else, and that's what they support. I believe the birth pang has just gotten more intense. That it's moving fast to one world government.
Right.
And they've now supported it with something that per se doesn't really make a lot of sense when there are alternatives to that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Or the courts say, yeah, you know what? This is taking away freedom. This is violating HIPAA. No, you can't mandate it. You can offer alternatives. People have to choose alternatives. Let's go back a little bit and let freedom of choice around a policy. And yeah, they got to prove it out, but go ahead and let them do it. Well, if that's true, I believe then we have more time.
Right.
That the birth pang hasn't accelerated. The birth pang hasn't gotten more intense. It's actually gone a little bit less. And you got more time.
But a certain level of desensitization has certainly occurred.
It's certainly occurred, and it hasn't stopped necessarily. But it just, to me, is like, is it closer than we think, or is it more time?
There's two things that got put on my radar this week that I'm just kind of paying attention to. Also, I saw an article for the first time today, and I'm kind of careful to watch. What the perspective I like to do is I like to actually read very liberal news sources as well as conservative and look for the overlap.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times the overlap is where you find where the nuggets of actual truth are.
Yep.
And so anyway, it sounds like Merck now has a drug that is really testing strongly for treatment, and they're expecting to potentially have it out by December. If they have a strong treatment, then in all the trials, what I'm seeing, the trials are reducing hospitalizations by over like 50 or 60%. I'd have to read it again to see, but it's a significant thing. They get it in the early stages. That I think is going to be interesting in how they then tackle the vaccine issue if there is actually treatment that is mainstream, that is coming in, that is going to be accepted. So I think that's an interesting thing also to be watching. And then another thing I think is interesting is to pay attention to what's going on in economics right now. And you have said for how long about the government being able to pay off their loans and stuff. And everything I'm reading says October 18th, if they don't pass a measure to raise the debt ceiling, the thing that as it is at risk there is the government defaulting on their loans,
Right.
which is what you've talked about. And even now, even liberal media is coming out and saying, if the debt ceiling is not raised and they cannot pay their loans, they default on their loans, then that's going to be catastrophic for the economy. And I mean, how many times have you said this? That this is what we're seeing. And so I think to me, those are two big things right now to be watching too that can shift the waters some.
Yeah, and the this whole debt ceiling, see, all by itself, we talk about chaos and we talk about what is happening. The 18th of October is when the government, the federal government, will not have enough cash
Right.
to support all the spending.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't raise the debt ceiling, then they don't have the ability to receive any more input
Mm-hmm.
and take care of it, which means they can't pay their bills.
Right.
And that's why it causes catastrophic, because it would cause everything to tumble. The dollar, all the credit, the
Right.
economy, it would go into a deeper recession, et cetera. So the government, which is, the parties, are
Mm-hmm.
fighting over this.
Right.
And the reason they're fighting over it is because the real issue, and let's forget about whether they do or do not. The real issue is that we're increasing our debt
Mm-hmm.
in order to pay our bills.
Right.
Well, it's accelerating to a point where forget about even paying it back. Which, by the way, the debt. Let me help explain what when we have debt, what are we talking about? We're talking about treasury bills,
Mm-hmm.
and they're purchased by individuals and countries and organizations.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of our debt, treasury bills, is owned by China and the Middle East.
Interesting. Well,
Now,
and China's having its own issues right now with Evergrande, and
they're
there's
having
all
they're
kinds
they're
of
having their own
yeah.
issues because they've been funding
Mm-hmm.
their economy with government debt,
Right.
and they have the same issue. But interesting enough, they hold our debt, and the Middle East holds our debt. Now this is this is interesting, because the question is, well, why, and how'd they get all that money?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we gave it to them. This is funny.
Mm-hmm.
China, over the last 15 years, 20 years, has gone to a manufacturing center of the world.
Oh goodness, yes.
So that
So much has gone over
so
there.
that American manufacturing
Mm-hmm.
basically shut down. It's not universal, but it's a big majority, and they shifted
Right.
everything to China. Why? And I can even remember this, that as businesses considered cost, which
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to improve my cost.
Yeah.
So when people would go, when companies would go to China, the Chinese, because of their labor rate was
Mm-hmm.
basically close to zero per se relative to what we were. When they calculated the cost, China said, don't even bother putting in labor. Just calculate the materials and the cost of shipping it. Well, when you take
Mm-hmm.
labor out of making anything, it's cheaper.
Right. Right.
So it shifted. Everything shifted to China.
Mm-hmm.
This is, by the way, worldwide.
Right.
So our manufacturing. So we then paid China to make our stuff
Mm-hmm.
and ship it to us. Well, what did that do? That gave them a tremendous inflow of cash and money. What happened in the Middle East? This happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, is that we became dependent on buying
Mm-hmm.
oil and gas from Middle East.
Right.
So we sent them money for their stuff, and they gave us oil and gas to function. Well,
Mm-hmm.
they became super wealthy. They took that, China and Middle East took the wealth and said, I'm going
And
to buy,
invested in the U.S.
I'm going to buy your treasuries to get return, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll in essence give you back your money, but we own the money and you owe us the money.
Mm-hmm.
So the debt is owned by them. So if they wanted to, and because of what you just said about China, they may want to.
Right.
They may say, well, we're struggling, so we're not gonna refund. It's called rolling over. We're not gonna roll over our treasury bills. We want you to pay us off.
Right.
So if they ever did that, well, we don't have any cash,
Right.
so we couldn't do it. We default, and that'd be it. So that's one issue. The second issue is interest payments. We do keep interest payments current.
Right.
If you buy treasuries, you expect to get paid the interest. Well, the Fed, central banks, basically have moved the interest payments pretty close to zero. 0.25%, 0.5%. I don't know if you have a savings account in your bank, but they basically don't pay you anything.
Right. Right.
On the savings account because the interest rate is so low. Well, there's a reason for that. Given that the economy, suffered in 2008, started to really come back in 2012, and boomed really till today.
Right.
Well, when that happens, the central banks generally raise interest rates to kind of level it out. And they raise interest rates. They never did. Okay, right now, there's a second factor called inflation.
Right.
By the way, caused by what? Government spending. That is heating up more than is normal flow. The central banks, generally speaking, when there's inflation, raise interest rates.
Right.
Why? To get inflation back under control and cause the economic system to balance itself out. And they came out when the inflation starts to hit this last year and said it's transitory.
Yeah.
Which
They're
meant,
backpedaling pretty good on that now, right?
Yeah, which meant, don't worry about it. It's just temporary. Don't worry about it. Well, they've come out over the last 2 months and said, it's not transitory.
Right.
It's going to be a long-term deal. Okay, last month when the Fed met, they said next year we may raise interest rates. Only said it so that everybody who said, why aren't you raising interest rates? Well, they said we may. When? Next year. They should be doing it right now. Okay, now in those two scenarios, when they normally, over the course of ever since they've been functioning over the last 2 centuries, why wouldn't they do it? They can't. If they did, the government would have to pay the interest to these holders of the treasury bills, and it would consume our annual budget. And they couldn't pay all the other bills, so they can't do it. So they're stuck. So the real issue about the debt is, first of all, it could shut down on if they don't come to an agreement, it's going to shut down on the 18th.
Right.
I believe they will come to an agreement because I don't think anybody believes that that's a good idea.
Right.
But the outcome, they're going to raise the debt limit, which means we just borrow more, and they'll just push it down and keep raising the debt, and that's what we've been doing for the last 30 years. And now we're at 30 trillion. By the way, there's a whole thing called off-balance sheet debt that we don't even calculate. That's probably 100 trillion. But the known debt with the treasury bills is 30 trillion. going to go up to 33 trillion, 36 trillion, 40 trillion. Well, our GDP is in the 20s. So we've exceeded now our GDP with the debt. And when we cross that line, it now becomes, in a sense, a point of no return.
Right.
Is you can't make it. So again, if you look at it in a simple way, your family. If you have less income than you have expenses, what do? You use credit cards. Eventually, you max them out.
Right.
And then you're stuck, because guess what? We're not going to give you any more credit, or the interest rate goes so high you're consuming your whole budget with interest, and you can't pay your bills. One of the two has to break.
Right.
Well, that's, on a government basis, the argument is, well, yeah, but we're government and that's individual. Well, the principle still holds.
Yeah, I tell you, if any of us personally ran our finances the way the government runs theirs, we would call them idiots.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
don't do that.
So what you're proposing here is, this is something to watch.
Yeah.
What happens to the debt? What I predict is that they will come to an agreement. They will raise it. By the way, Yellen, who used to be, the Fed chairman. She's now the secretary chair. She's head of the the Treasury.
Okay.
So now she's in that role, and she just came out yesterday and said, let's just permanently get rid of any debt limit.
Get rid of it. I heard that.
And let's just ultimately borrow as much money as we want. That's kind of dangerous. In a way, she's saying, why don't we just get rid of it, because we're playing the game anyway, and we're at a point where we can't stop borrowing. We have to keep borrowing more to function. Every year, you Democrats and Republicans fight over it and ultimately decide to raise the debt limit because you have to. Why don't we just skip all that and just end the debt limit? Which means it'll just soar and soar and soar and soar and soar. That's one of the things to really watch is what happens with that. Do we wind up with a problem on the 18th? Do they raise the debt limit? When's the next debt limit issue going to be? Because again, what will happen in the tribulation is there will be an economic collapse that causes everything to fail, so that when the one world government comes and says we have the solution, everybody says, yeah, great, fantastic. We surrender our sovereignty. We're going to follow the new federation. And we think this is a good idea because it collapses. Well, theoretically, interesting enough, I don't think this is going to happen, but on the 18th of October, they could collapse the system.
Yeah.
It's doable, feasible, and they could do it. And just say, okay, that's it. And everything just goes into a deep, deep, deep depression, recession, because they set it up with the way the government works. When that fails, everything else follows.
Right.
And I personally believe that's probably what's going to happen. When they collapse the system, it'll be a gigantic issue with debt, and it's going to cause the rippling effect into the deep, deep, deep catastrophe, which, by the way, is purposeful.
Right. So that does fulfill prophecy.
Yeah, it fulfills prophecy and is purposeful. So we've talked about the seals. There's the fifth, sixth seal. The fifth seal is martyrdom. By the way, over the last 10 years has been the greatest number of martyrs in the history of Christianity. And then the sixth seal is economic collapse, which occurs, causing the tribulation, and then leads to God's wrath. So we're not sure where those are in terms of, have they been opened up? Are they in play right now? Certainly they could be. But those seals, and then we come to the tribulation. Okay, well, let's talk about the tribulation. And Daniel actually lays this out for us quite a bit. So go to Daniel chapter 7, verses 7 and 8, first of all, and then read 15 to 28. We'll pick it up, and then we'll go further with that as we go to Daniel 8. But go ahead and just start with Daniel 7, 7 and 8.
Okay. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things.
Okay, and then go to 15 through 28.
As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions in my head, visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all of this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever, and ever. Then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet, and about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth and spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth, and trample it down, and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Here is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed, but I kept the matter in my heart.
Yeah, and then go up to Daniel 8, 23 to 27.
Okay. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power, and he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and people and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I arose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty amazing, huh?
Wow.
Whoa.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Oh, there really is. So Daniel, remember, laid out the timeline. And he said there's 70 weeks left. And he describes the first 3 beasts that occur, and he lays out the timeline. So the 62 weeks until Christ. Then there's 69, and then there's a process of 1 week left.
Right.
And the 1 week, and remember, a week is each day is a year. So 1 week
Mm-hmm.
is 7 years. And his timing up until Christ was precise, exact.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got 1 week left. And he talked about the three beasts that are these empires.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, the Persians, the Greeks, and then the Romans. And they occurred, during this time. And then he says, he's talking here, he said, there's one more left,
Mm-hmm.
the fourth beast. He said, it's completely different than the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to occur during the last week. So he's talking about the beast, and he's talking about the tribulation.
Right.
And he said it's going to be terrible. It's going to be dreadful, exceedingly strong, and it's going to. It says it has the iron teeth and the nails of bronze, and it's going to devour things and break into pieces and trample the residue with its feet. Okay, so the beast is a system.
Okay.
And we got to be careful. A lot of people confuse the beast with the Antichrist.
Right.
It's not the same.
Two separate things.
separate
One is
things.
the economic system, essentially, right?
It's
And
a
then
new.
the other is
it's
an actual
it's the
person
one
or
world
leader.
government. It's a one world government with a new economic
Mhm.
system that now rules
Mm-hmm.
in the same way the other beasts did. So the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, they ruled,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of operated with a system
Mm-hmm.
of how they did it. So he said it's the fourth beast, a ruler, like it was before, but in this case, it's different.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it talks about it has 10 horns, and you would a horn is a leader, is a head.
Okay.
So it's got 10 heads. Now, in the past, a lot of people tried to figure that out with, well, that must be 10 nations
Mm-hmm.
that come together and form the one world government. And so, it'd be EU and China, Russia, Middle East, US, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera. A couple things about that. One, he said it's different.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a national government, in my opinion. It has some other structure to it that's different. Two is that by definition, it's a new one world government. So I doubt that it's individual nations trying to come together and still maintain their individual nation mentality. It's going to be a total surrender to a one world government that looks different. And he said it's terrible and devours and breaks in pieces. And so here's what I think. We have an operating economy worldwide right now. Different currencies, different manufacturing capability, different places, and it's all functioning to some level. And of course, COVID has put some stress on that.
Right, absolutely.
And the governments around the world and the economies around the world are struggling. Now, by the way, America happened to be one that's actually has done quite well because as they've allowed people to get back to business and work, all that pent-up demand started to accelerate. Like, for example, housing. I don't know for you, but anywhere outside of a city, housing prices and the transactions, the number of transactions has skyrocketed.
Absolutely skyrocketed. They are saying that's slowing now, though.
It's starting to slow, which by the way, is going to happen. Absolutely going to happen. And by the way, it's overpriced, so the prices are going to shrink.
Right. It should correct some.
It's going to correct. That's again, it's just pure economics. Um, but think of people going to sporting events, people are going to restaurants, going to concerts, going out again, spending money, going to the store, buying things. Well, that stimulates an economy, and it's called the multiplier effect. The more that you grow, the faster it happens. Now, by the way, it reaches a point, and you just said it, housing is an example. It accelerated, and it grew tremendously. Well, what happens is, in economics, it in a sense gets overdone. And so people say, well, I've reached my limit. I can't pay anymore, and I'm not going to move as much, and no, I don't care as much. So everything cools off. And that's what's going to happen. But in America, we've been a very vibrant economy, which, by the way, when this first happened, and I talked to people, I said, right now, I would be careful where you put your money, but I'm going to tell you something. When this thing is released to some level, it's going to be a boom time. Now, again, I don't believe it's going to last for very long, and there's lots of discussion even today of we may be headed to a recession because we can't see it, keeping up. But around the world, we have a system. The beast says it tramples that system and it destroys that system, so that it's not a refinement of the way we do things today. It's a complete destruction of what we do today and set up a whole new system.
Right.
It's a one world government.
Yeah, that's interesting that it talks about it being completely destroyed.
Yes, completely destroyed. And when the tribulation starts, it's the beast. And all we know when it starts, we don't know the Antichrist yet, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Right.
We know the beast. The beast is one world system, one world government with a new economic system that has completely destroyed everything that we've ever been used to.
Right.
Now, why? Well, because the collapse, everything collapsed, and they destroyed it purposely in order to bring about a new system that, by the way, interesting enough, everybody except a few believers who are called the remnant willingly adopt.
Right.
And because why? Well, because they're in such dire straits from the collapse that when somebody comes along and says, hey, by the way, I've got a solution and it'll work really, really well, everybody says, great. And I believe, by the way, this is one of the reasons why the governments of the world are becoming so basically inept, with no ability to solve anything. Because then there's a discouragement on the part of, like, the Americans, because we're fairly independent.
Right.
And per se, out of all the countries in the world, we would have the most difficulty surrendering our allegiance to the United States of America, who stands for freedom and stands for capitalism, etc. And we're going to give that up for some. Well, I don't know if you talk to people, but there's polls and there's discussion. What do you think about our government's ability to help us?
Right.
The answer is,
and faith is greatly diminished right now.
I don't think they can do it at all. They can't seem to do anything right. And all it is a bunch of people just fight with each other, and they never get anything done. We're losing confidence in the system. I think it's purposeful. Why? Well, so the one world government will be, okay, you know what?
Will actually be attractive at
That's
that
going to be
point.
attractive. So yeah, sure. Let's do that. Okay, now here's an interesting thing. I thought about this. I prayed about this. Processed this a lot. I said, okay, if it's different, and it's not 10 nations, what might it be? What I've received and what I processed is it's corporations.
Yeah, I
It's
think this is a fascinating idea. I've heard you talk
uh,
about this.
it's a corporate structure where, interesting enough, and let me just give you a couple of pieces of information. The big companies of the world are truly worldwide.
Right.
So Apple and Google and Amazon
Mm-hmm.
and Facebook, Twitter, they're worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
They're already worldwide.
Right.
And people are used to them operating on a worldwide basis, and they're international in their thinking and in
Mm-hmm.
their capability. Number two, this is really interesting. Um, the top 10, 20 international companies own 90% of the wealth of the world.
Wow.
They have cash,
Mm-hmm.
trillions of dollars of cash that they have, and guess who doesn't have cash?
The governments.
No government in the world, interesting enough, except Israel.
Oh, interesting.
Israel has cash. They
Hmm.
have now they're struggling as everyone else does, but they have the ability to function without having to be out of balance, and they are.
Interesting. Okay.
China, Russia. Russia, interesting enough, is probably the next strongest country, interesting enough, economically,
Really?
even over China, because they've done a really fine job of building up cash without debt.
Hmm.
So they're a player. That's an interesting play too. But so what I see is that when we have a one world government, I believe it's in a corporate type structure,
Mm-hmm.
and the equity, the stock that people will have available to them, will be in these chosen companies.
Hmm.
That, because remember, he's going to trample the system, so we're going to lose. I
Right.
believe we'll lose our stock market system.
Right.
It'll be something completely different. So I can foresee that it's a 10-unit corporate structure with
Mm-hmm.
heads of these businesses, and I believe, by the way, it's not just therefore American businesses.
Right.
So it can be Alibaba from China, it can be ones from EU
Mm-hmm.
that are part of the group.
In fact, it would make the most sense if it was diverse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and because of the structure, and again, think of a structure in a corporate environment. There's, let's say, a president,
Mm-hmm.
and then below that are vice presidents, and below them are directors. So when I say a 10-unit structure, there's 10 heads,
Mm-hmm.
and below that will be other businesses, will be other
Right.
structures, but they won't be the top.
Okay.
There'll be 10 top guys, 10 top people that will lead this unit, and they'll
Mm-hmm.
form the new government that we make the decisions, and here are the rules that you have to
Mm-hmm.
follow, that we quote, and I'm going to use this interesting word, mandate.
Hmm.
We've heard that, haven't we? Called the
Just a little
vaccine
bit.
mandate.
Yeah.
They mandate it. And because they mandate it, they require everybody to take the mark of the beast.
Right.
You have to agree to it.
Mm-hmm.
If you agree to it, you can function economically. And by the way, you have to do everything we tell you to do. So it's likely you won't have any private ownership of property. We'll own it all. You can invest maybe your excess. I do believe there'll be an equalization process.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll come up with a way to
Right.
give you value. So if you have a $5 million house versus the guy that has a $100,000 house, they'll come up with a way to equalize that in some way.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get income. Debt will be completely released. You'll have
Mm-hmm.
no debt at all. Nobody will have any debt. It'll be a start over.
Which I think that point, I'm just going to highlight on that. I think it's interesting that you do already see conversations, you've seen them for a few years now, but more so during COVID, of that sort of thing right there, starting with the student loan debt
Yes,
forgiveness.
yes.
conversations, and you see a generation buying into the idea that that's a good thing.
Yes, yeah, because it
And
takes off the
so
pressure.
that's something to pay attention to as well.
Yeah, yeah. If you give me income
Mm-hmm.
to function, and I know I have to agree to a certain way of doing it, and I don't have any debt, and so my money can be spent on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I work, yeah, there'll be a hierarchy. I still think there'll be a hierarchy of you can make, quote, more if you work at certain jobs and certain things. I don't think it'll be a pure, what I'd call, communist system, to where just everybody makes the same, that's it. I think because interesting enough, during the scriptures, we'll get to it, it said there's tremendous wealth building during the first
Right.
3.5 years of the tribulation.
So it can't be complete communism.
No,
Yeah.
because there has to be an opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to build wealth. And there is. And so I think it's just an equalization and release of all the debt. So there's a whole new system, but you got to take the mark of the beast. And you say, I now agree with and will allow this 10-unit beast to run the world, and whatever they mandate, because it's not remember, it's no longer a democracy.
Right.
We don't vote on anything. They tell us what they're going to do, and here's how it's going to work, and we willingly accept that and say, okay, you run the show, and it's 10 nations now, or 10 units. So we're running out of time here, but think about this. It even says it. You read it, and we're gonna discuss this next time. The Antichrist arises out of the beast. It goes from 10 to 7 to 5 to 3 to 2 to 1. Well, he's one of those 10 heads. Over the first several months, years of the tribulation, the other heads are basically taken over and eliminated by, well, no, you're no longer going to be in charge of that. And we don't have 10, we have 7. Then we don't have 7, we have 5. Then we don't have 5, we have 3. Then we don't have 3, we have 2. One remaining. That's the Antichrist. Okay. And this is interesting. As we look at that today, we would say, well, wouldn't that be obvious that guy is getting rid of those other 9 guys? And the answer is no. It's clever, and every time it happens, it's actually applauded by the people of the world. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh yeah, hallelujah, great.
Interesting, right?
Because the only ones that will know Antichrist, and again, just think about this. Who's going to know Antichrist? Believers,
right?
Christians that see what it is. Everybody else will see this person as fantastic. And actually, and we'll talk about it, there's a false prophet, a Christian who says, this is actually the way to go. And by the way, he supports when he says, I'm God. Yeah. But he's really anti-God, Antichrist. Interesting. Satan. So it's really interesting stuff.
I know we're running short on time, but I'm just going to put this out there. Remind me next time we're doing End Times Friday to ask you about a passage that I came across in Hebrews 12 that I believe actually foreshadows the mark of the beast as well, and a warning against taking it. So I just wanted to talk to you about that and see your thoughts on it. But it was interesting. But I know we don't have time to go there right now.
And again, we'll just end it with the beast is a system. The mark of the beast is agreeing to the system. It's not the mark of the Antichrist. A lot of people can get that confused. They'll say, oh, it'll be obvious because that guy is telling me I got to do it. Interesting enough, it's not the guy, it's the system. Yeah. That people willingly say. And a lot of believers, by the way, say, this is actually good because God solved our problem. That system, that's okay. That'll work. That's a blessing. Isn't that a blessing? See how tricky it is? Right. It's really interesting. And that's why we got to really be aware of it, because God's going to say to us, don't take the mark.
Right, right. Well, and this passage that I want to talk about in Hebrew is actually definitely, if it is talking about the mark of the beast as well, it definitely puts the economic spin on it too. So you see that very clearly.
I know. Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
interesting. So we'll pick it up again, and you know we've set it up so the tribulation is through this beast. The beast is a 10-unit system for sure. Is it nations? I don't think so. I think it's a corporate structure, and it comes about on a worldwide basis that everybody says, except for a few believers again who are remnant who understand it. Ooh, isn't this a good idea? And everybody says, "Yep, I surrender to that new sovereignty, and I'm doing it willingly." So we'll pick it up, and we could talk. There's so much interesting information
it's
that
fascinating discussion, right?
we get involved with. So we'll continue that next time. If you got any questions, send it on to us, and we'll be happy to talk about it. And we'll look forward to seeing you next Monday.
Sounds great. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and be encouraged. Even in the midst of all these signs that are going on, our God reigns, and you can count on him to lead and direct every step. Just keep abiding, guys.
Amen.
Have a great
All right.
weekend.
Thank you. Yeah, see you.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.